So thanks again for joining. The purpose of today really is to give you guys, as our volunteer mentors, thank you so much for being mentors. It really would be a pretty shoddy mentorship program without you. But acknowledging some of you may be really old hands at this. Some of you, however, might be new to being mentors. So with that in mind, we thought it would be useful to have just a little session with an expert in the area of mentorship to just share some insights and a bit of background on, what does good mentoring look like? What makes a good mentor? How does this relationship differ from other kind of, line management relationships or similar like that? So on that basis, I've invited Rose, who is one of our HR professionals here at UCL Partners, to join us to take you through some of those kind of questions around mentorship and what it means and what good looks like. I'll hand over to Rose in just a second, but first of all, huge thanks to her for joining us and sharing her expertise. I think, Rose, about 15 or 20 minutes of kind of content, if you like, from you. Is that about right? And then we've got plenty of time for questions and discussion. Obviously, Rose is here to answer questions, but equally for those of you who've done mentoring before, it's a great opportunity to share your reflections and your experience. We're here to learn from each other as much as we are from Rose, and certainly I have nothing useful to impart in this space. So I'm really looking forward to this. I'm delighted now to hand over to Rose to kind of kick us off. All yours, Rose.
Thank you, Kate. Hello, everybody. Really lovely to meet you and lovely to be here. I guess two disclaimers. I have got some slides to run through. They're not the prettiest, but hopefully they kind of get the message across. And I am slightly under the weather today, so I may need to stop to kind of clear my throat. I may lose my voice or drink water, but hopefully we should be fine. So yeah, as Kate said, I'm in the HR team at UCL Partners, and to give a bit of background to kind of why I'm here as the expert in the room. So I started a coaching course with the Academy of Executive Coaching in November. So I'm not quite an expert, but I have been on quite a steep learning journey in the world of coaching over the last few months, and I've been coaching practice clients and things throughout that time. I have been a mentee myself. In full transparency, I've not been a mentor, but there's quite a lot of overlap in the mentoring and coaching space, which I'll talk to a bit. So I will share my slides, and hopefully you'll be able to see them. Could have pressed presenter view before I did that, couldn't I? That would have been helpful. Can you see the slides? Perfect. Yeah, so kind of three sections of things to talk to. So starting off about what a good mentor-mentee relationship might look like, talking a little bit about the similarities and differences between coaching and mentoring, and then a couple of models that might help you frame the conversations that you'll have with your mentees. So starting off with some of those aspects, I think that kind of show that you've got a good mentor-mentee relationship. I think something quite key is that it's a two-way partnership. Whilst you're bringing all of your expertise and experience, it's great if it's a mutual learning opportunity for both of you. And I think that happens inevitably, but it's very much a two-way relationship. Something that's very important is cultivating trust and safety with your mentee, so that it's a safe space for them to talk about what they need to talk about. I think that does come over time as you're kind of building that rapport, but I think that's something to be aware of. I think part of that is the authenticity that you'll bring. So you're bringing your own expertise, your experience. So I think staying true to yourself and bringing that to your mentor will be really, really valuable. But also being adaptable to kind of their needs and working out what works for them. And I think it's helpful to have discussions about that as you move through the mentoring sessions, to talk about what works, what maybe doesn't work. That might be something that's helpful. I think setting clear expectations in the beginning about what they might be expecting to get from the relationship, and what you might be expecting, so that you can kind of set up that clarity in the beginning and know what you're coming into the relationship with. And part of that is having that thorough mentorship agreement in the beginning. I've seen, you've got the documentation for that, and I think it's quite important to set that up well in the beginning, because a good beginning means a good middle and means a good end. So having that clarity as you're beginning in terms of how you'll work together, getting to know your mentee will be helpful. I think setting clear goals and objectives also, so that you know what you're working towards and what you're working on together. So you may at the beginning of the relationship want to kind of set some overarching goals that the mentee might have for the relationship, and you can check in with those as you move through. I think it's helpful to know where you're aiming for, so you can kind of review as you go along, and then reflect at the end, and then the mentee can kind of reflect on their learning and where they've come, and you can do the same as the mentor. So as part of that, I think having regular check-ins and reviews. I think don't be afraid to ask for feedback in terms of what works for the coachee, and if there's anything that they'd like more of from you. And I think reflecting on your own practice as well. You might want to take 5-10 minutes after a mentoring session to reflect on how you found it. If there's anything that you'd like to kind of bring more of, just whatever comes up for you during that session. I think it could be quite helpful to think about that, and think about that as you move through the sessions. And a final thing, I've read the handbook. There's lots of really, really great stuff in there that I think is very helpful. I'm sure you'll be reading that anyway, but I would say there's a lot of really good material in there that will really help you in this journey. And speaking of the handbook, I actually have taken this from the handbook in terms of what will help the relationship work, because I think there's a lot of really important points in there. And as it says, it's important for both parties to be engaged and committed to the relationship. In terms of the mentor aspect there, so one thing that was listed is about active listening. I think part of that is, being really there and being present with the mentee, and listening carefully to what they're saying, and also listening to what they might not be saying. Maybe paying attention to their body language, their tone of voice, those kind of things that go beyond just what they're saying, but kind of how they're saying it. Then you can pick up on some interesting things that are going on for them as they're talking about whatever issues or goals they're bringing to you. Asking exploratory questions. So I think just really coming from a place of curiosity, and asking kind of clear and open questions, not closed questions that are only going to elicit a yes or no answer, but kind of clear and open questions that can get to the heart of what the mentee needs and what they're trying to communicate. The challenge appropriately, I think that's something that you can discuss at the beginning with your mentee. So that's what the contracting note is about. So, how would you feel if I challenge you? What does challenge look like to you? Are you open for me to challenge you? What might that look like? So I think being clear on how that will work in the beginning will be really helpful. And if you come across any moments where you might be challenging them slightly in a session, you can, how was that for you? So kind of just being really clear that you're on the same page about that. Being empathetic, I think, speaks for itself. Respecting the mentee's agenda, so they'll be talking about what's important for them, and it will be kind of led by them and what's going on for them. I think provide shape and purpose in the conversations is something that the models that we'll talk about in a minute will be really helpful for. I think, having the genuine desire to support the mentee as well, and being in touch with current realities for more junior analysts, so you can kind of understand what sort of things they might be experiencing. So to talk a little bit about coaching and mentoring, there is quite a lot of overlap. There are differences. I think people are still trying to really define what those are. There's a lot of schools of thought, and people have put a lot of time into that. But I think the EMCC, is the European Mentoring and Coaching Council, have some quite helpful information on that. I think I wouldn't worry too much about the difference, but they define mentoring as a learning relationship involving the sharing of skills, knowledge, and expertise between a mentor and a mentee through developmental conversations, experience sharing, and role modeling. The relationship may cover a wide variety of contexts and is an inclusive two-way partnership for mutual learning that values differences. They also have a definition of coaching and mentoring. So they say coaching and mentoring is a professionally guided process that inspires clients to maximize their personal and professional potential. It's a structured, purposeful, and transformational process, helping clients to see and test alternative ways for improvement of competence, decision-making, and enhancement of quality of life. Coach and mentor and client work together in a partnering relationship on strictly confidential terms. In this relationship, clients are experts on the content and decision-making level, and the coach and mentor is an expert in professionally guiding the process. So that kind of covers mentoring and the kind of that line between coaching and mentoring. But to kind of outline some of the differences, if that's helpful. So coaching in its purest form is non-directive. So you're not giving advice, you're not giving your opinion. You're asking questions to open that up for the coachee themselves. And in mentoring, it might be more directive. So you're more actively giving advice and kind of imparting your wisdom and your expertise. You might be asking, leading them. But in coaching, in this purest form, you're trying not to lead the client, and it's really led by them. Typically, coaching would be used more around kind of current issues, so things like performance, more short-term goals, although it can be applied to lots of contexts. And then mentoring is more around long-term goals and career aspirations. In coaching, as the coach, you're helping the coachee to find the answers. So you're not giving them the answers, but you're helping them to find the answers within themselves. But in a mentoring relationship, in that kind of more directive sense, the mentee may just need some advice and guidance on particular issues. And you bringing your expertise in that may be able to help them, or talk about what you've done in the past that's worked, or any learning that you've had from similar experiences. And as a coach, you don't necessarily need knowledge and expertise in the area or the industry that the client is in. You need expertise in the skills of coaching, but you actually don't need to know the detail. You don't need to kind of bring any experience from that. You just need to manage the coaching process and ask the right questions. And then in mentoring, so I'm just going to take a drink. Mentoring, you're really imparting the knowledge and expertise that you have in the area or industry for the mentee, and to help them and to help their learning. So hopefully that gives you a bit of an overview of the differences. There is a lot of overlap, and the principles and skills are quite similar. So as I said, I wouldn't worry too much about which space you're in. Either way, some of these models can really help you to structure the conversations. So I've put two in here. This one was actually in the handbook itself, called the 5 C's, the mentor conversation prompts. I haven't used this model myself. I'm not familiar with it, but I think it's quite a good way of structuring the session. So starting off by talking about what the challenges the mentee is facing, potential choices to help them tackle those challenges, what the consequences might be of different choices, if there are any kind of creative solutions that might help that they haven't thought of, and then kind of following up with the action from that. So that's a possible model that you can use. And the other model that is quite a user-friendly model is the GROW model, which is more of a coaching model. I think you'll find what works for you. So, and I think, experiment with different models and ways of doing it as well, and you'll find the way that, that's most authentic to you in terms of how you shape sessions and the sort of questions you ask. But the GROW model is quite a user-friendly model in coaching that you can use. So to talk through that model, it's credited to John Whitmore, although lots of people were involved in actually developing the model, but it's his foundation that it's credited to. And since then, there's been a kind of a moderation of To Grow Me, where you have where you start off with a topic and then you end with some monitoring evaluation. So you can either take the kind of the simple GROW form. I think it's quite helpful to add the topic in there initially, because that's quite a key stage in the process. So you'll be starting off checking in with the mentee what they would like to talk about in that session, what they would like to cover. Then you're moving through to the goal. So, what would you like to achieve in this session? Where would you like to be at the end of the session in relation to this topic? It may not be, ideally it's a kind of a smart, measurable goal, but that may not always be the case. So a goal, it could be a feeling, that they might want to just feel like they have a bit more clarity on an issue by the end of the conversation, or that they've kind of worked something out, or it might be something more tangible, like a specific plan or a particular action that they're going to take away. But being really clear on what the goal is that you're working towards in the session is very helpful. Also, as part of that, defining how you'll know the goal has been met. So once you've clarified the goal with the mentee, asking a question like, so how will we know we've had a successful conversation? Or how will you know by the end of this session that goal has been met? So that just helps to kind of know what you're working towards. And then you can check back in that at the end, or even sort of partway through the session to just check in that you're on track to meet that goal for the coachee. The next stage would be kind of examining the current reality. So where is the mentee at the moment in their thinking? There's quite a lot of exploratory work that you can do in that section, how they're feeling about things, just kind of understanding what's going on for them and helping them to gain some self-awareness in terms of where they're at and what they may need to overcome in order to get to the goal. So once you've explored the reality section, you can start exploring some options to help them kind of move forward. And you can explore different options, the pros and cons of different options, how they feel about certain options, if they've got any fears about certain options, just kind of going through the possible avenues to explore. And I think in this area, you can ask, what else questions to really get them to think about what they might not have considered. You can ask questions like, if you had a magic wand, what would you do? If you had no fear, what would you do? If you weren't afraid to fail, what would you do? Those sort of, if anything was possible, what would you do? You can really kind of push those kind of questions to open the mentee's thinking. And then moving through to the end of the model is will, or sometimes it's called way forward. So you're really kind of gaining the mentee's commitment to what they're going to do and how they're going to, explore one of those options or what they're actually taking away. You can ask things like, how are you going to keep yourself accountable? What would you like this to look like by the time you've, depending on what the topic is, but how would you like to feel about this once you've taken that action? So you're really kind of gaining the so what of the conversation. And then you can check back in about the goal at the beginning to say, we agreed that this is what we would work towards. How are you feeling in relation to that goal? Is there anything else that you need to help you to meet that goal? So you're kind of rechecking in about what you agreed in the beginning. And you can also ask things, what have you learned during this session? What are you taking away? Really kind of focusing on the next steps for them. And I think something that's quite nice to do is to ask, by our next session, what would you like to report back on? Or is there anything you'd like to be able to say when we next meet that you've done in relation to this? So that's kind of the way that you might work through the GROW model. It doesn't have to be completely linear. It may not follow exactly those 5 steps in exactly that order. But I think, again, you can find the way that it works for you and the sorts of questions that are helpful for you. And we can send round, I have a handout of some potential questions that can be asked under those topics that perhaps we can share with people. And something under there in the goal setting tips that I didn't mention was the scaling. So I think depending on what the goal is, a way to do it might be, if they say, I want to feel more confident in this area, you can explore in the reality section, well, how would you rate yourself? If 10 was the most confident you could be, where are you at the moment? And then you can ask, where would you like to be at the end of this session in terms of your confidence, or even at the end of our mentoring relationship, where would you like to be, to kind of have a quantifiable measure for that. That may not work for all topics and for all people. That would be quite a good way of kind of working towards a specific goal or the improvement that you're hoping to get out of the sessions. And just some final tips kind of around using this. So listening carefully, not assuming what the conversation is about or what path it should take. Some advice that I've got that I found quite helpful in my coaching course is that they will answer the question that they need, not necessarily the question that you ask. So it's really they'll be, leading it from what's most important or interesting for them. So it's not for you to assume what that's going to look like. responding thoughtfully. So again, that's about those open questions and coming from genuine curiosity and openness and exploration of what's going on for them. And then resist imposing your own solution. So you're not telling them what to do. You're not problem solving for them. You're kind of helping them to do that. But again, this is a slightly more coaching approach. So perhaps in more of a mentoring relationship, there may be a time when they just really want your advice, and that's the appropriate thing to do in that section. But helping them work through that by themselves can be really impactful. And then, they're more likely to take away the actions if they've come up with them themselves than if somebody's given that to them. So there's just some extra tips in terms of having those conversations. And I think that's the end of the PowerPoint. So I will stop sharing my screen.
Fantastic. Thank you ever so much, Rose. We had a couple of questions in the chat, the first of which was in this particular mentorship program, the vast majority of our sessions between mentors and mentees are done over Teams because we're quite geographically spread out. Ruth asked if there are any different ways we should approach sessions if we're on Teams, given that it can kind of filter out some of those non-verbal communications as opposed to if it was in a more traditional, I suppose, face-to-face context.
Yeah, obviously there are slight differences. You're not, you're only seeing this part of somebody. So I think it is, realistically, it is slightly harder to pick up on those cues, but it's absolutely still possible. And I think as you get to know your mentee, you'll get to know their, how they are, and that'll make it easier to kind of pick up on those cues. So I think, I wouldn't deny that it is slightly harder over Teams, but it's absolutely still possible. I think you'll kind of tune into what that is for your mentee. So I think over time it might become easier.
Thank you, Rose. So another comment that came up on the chat was around establishing psychological safety, and I think Ronnie's made the point that it's so important in terms of laying the foundation for a relationship. So a question for you, Rose, but also everyone else on the call, in terms of kind of hints and tips of how you can establish that psychological safety, early on, rather than spending 12 months establishing the relationship and then running out of time to actually talk about the meaty stuff. But open that up to the floor and just kind of reflecting on your own experiences.
I'll come in, given that I put the comments in. From my experience, I think the contract between you and the mentee from the very beginning is important. So you can establish that quite quickly, just giving that reassurance to the mentee that the discussion you're having is confidential between those two and really focused on the person's development. I think you could probably establish that quite quickly. And as you said, Rose, you can tune into that person, what they really need, and from that discussion together. But I feel some of my experience that if you don't build that from the very beginning, then the discussion becomes quite difficult, challenging, perhaps.
Yeah. Ruth, do you want to come in on that?
It's a really, really good point. I'm glad Ronnie mentioned it. Apologies, multitasking, I'm eating and meeting at the same time. So we're quite a small community. This is an observation. We're quite a small community in AphA and also in the wider NHS, and a lot of us know each other. So I think the psychological safety part is really, really important, and the confidentiality part is really, really important to emphasize at the beginning, because we do network. I happen to know the overall boss of one of my mentees, and I haven't had the first meeting yet, but my plan at the first meeting is to mention that, but also reassure that anything that's said to me is going to remain confidential and will not be repeated, regardless of who I know or who I talk to. And I think that's really quite important. I mean, if anyone thinks that I shouldn't be mentioning that I know the person's overall boss, teach me. I'm very willing to learn, but I felt that the right approach would be to just air it and just mention that it doesn't matter and it doesn't affect the relationship or what is said to me. I just felt it was better to explicitly mention it up front.
I think transparency is always better than obfuscation. These things have a tendency to come out anyway, and it would, that's not establishing trust, is it? If something comes up and there's a perception that it's something you're trying to hide. Hugh.
Yeah, just really agreeing with Ruth, really, and you. That the more open you are about things, it then gives you an opportunity to support the mentee with that contact as well, because they may need help in reaching out to other people. Ultimately, we all have our specialisms, and therefore, by default, we have our own areas that we're not as strong in. So by knowing other people, you can talk about it. Would you like me to speak to this person about it? No, thank you. Yes, please. Without that kind of conversation, you can't really make those suggestions.
Absolutely, Hugh. Kay.
Yeah, if you do find yourself in a sticky situation, which hopefully we won't, where you're maybe hearing things that maybe how do we navigate that? Is there some advice in this group that we think we should agree on if things become? I mean, I understand the confidentiality in the open space, but what if in the process you hear something? I'm not saying this would happen. Just to kind of think about how we would navigate. Do we need to escalate or leave it there, or how do we manage that? I just thought that came to my mind.
It's a really good question, Kay. I just want to make sure we understand it. So, for example, if there was I don't know, this might be a bit extreme, but kind of a safeguarding issue that came up, for example, is that the kind of thing that you mean?
Yeah.
I'll open that to the floor. I mean, Rose, do you have a view on that? Because that's quite an HR question that might come up.
Safeguarding, bullying, just that type of thing that, I think it would be quite difficult for myself to navigate on how I should respond to that.
I mean, my first question.
No, go ahead, Bruce.
I was just going to say, my first question would be: is there some guidance on that from AphA on that kind of situation? Is there already something existing that kind of outlines what to do?
No, there's some discussion. There's a bit in the handbook about what happens if the relationship doesn't work. If you can't establish that trust, you don't get on or whatever, but not that kind of safety element, I guess. Hugh, you're on mute. Hugh, you're still on mute.
Sorry. Yeah, it always depends on what the problem is. Never in these situations are you expected to sacrifice your own moral judgment, which is why, if there's anything which involves breaking the law, etc., for hyper extreme cases, you're still complete liberty to say it to the relevant people. But similarly, if they are engaging in activities that you think are wrong, yes, there is a certain element of trust that you've built up, but you will need to address that with them and say, look, this is what you're suggesting, reporting inaccurate details to NHS England or whatever, you can't do this. That has to stop for these reasons. And not necessarily in terms of reporting it, because that's down to you. I don't think, because what they're doing is statutorily wrong, you can't. You still can, but I think it would be a difficult situation to carry on the relationship if they are doing something to which you morally object. With safeguarding issues, if it's for their safeguarding, they're adults, so unless there is a specific protected character written, even then, there isn't anything really set out for safeguarding issues, because people are able to protect themselves in that way. That's not to say that your own moral judgment therefore falls off, because ultimately there is nothing within a mentorship arrangement which says that you must sacrifice your own moral judgment. It's all going to be down to what the problem is.
Ronnie?
Yeah, I agree, Hugh. This is a really interesting discussion, actually, Kay, that you brought together. What I was going to say is that as mentors, we also need to feel that we're not alone. I know we have informal networks, and even though we are maintaining confidentiality, I suppose if it happened to me that as Kate, who's leading the program, I'll have a chat, but maybe we also need to have a confidential peer group of people where we could discuss, so we're not alone in those kind of situations. I know we won't be, but if we create a smaller group of people, I think that's really important for us to also reconnect together if there's an issue happening between the mentor and mentees, just so we have the support network between ourselves too.
Yeah, Rose has posted really useful reading. It's a very thought-provoking discussion in the chat, and I think it's probably an action for me to take away and consider, some guidance, explicit guidance for mentors for these kinds of situations. I think more on the safety side of things. I kind of agree with you, Hugh, when it's, a data ethics question and you're concerned that the mentee is behaving unethically or doing something unethical. Given the context in which we work, the outcomes of that could be quite significant. But I think it would be useful for us as a team, as a mentoring team, to kind of reflect on how we can support mentors for some of these more complex situations. That's really helpful. Thank you. The only other note in terms of questions that I made was, Hugh, you mentioned feedback, and Rose, you talked about prompt questions and things like that. So we've got lots, I suspect, of kind of differing tools and things that we could share and utilize as a group. So Ronnie, your suggestion of kind of having at least a group space and occasionally confidential group meetings to share some of that would be really useful. So I'll have a chat with Lizzie about getting a little bit on the website that we can use that to access some of those. And Hugh, thanks for sharing it already. I set this meeting up, I can still access that afterwards, but I'll send it round in case everyone else gets booted out of the chat. And Rose, I assume you wouldn't mind if you could share your list of prompt questions. That would also be really helpful if you're happy to do that.
Yeah, they were prompt questions around the GROW model, not around.
Yeah, no, yeah, I appreciate that.
Yeah,
but
yeah, no, we'll do.
Models. And then the other, just kind of chair's privilege, I suppose, any other question that I had for the group, for those of you who've done this kind of stuff before, Rose mentioned a couple of models, the 5 Cs, which is the one that we put into the handbook, and the GROW model has come up a couple of times in various other discussions, and I might add that into the handbook as well. Does anyone have any preferences? Are there models that you've used in previous practice that have been particularly useful that you might be happy to chat about? Okay, you're nodding your head.
Yeah, I think the GROW model, I'm a mentor at City University for some of the students there, and they use the GROW model, and I think it helps you stay focused, because when you're mentoring, it can easily turn into a nice chat, which is good for building the trust and the relationship. But while I've been doing the mentoring, I do refer back to that, and it helps me stay focused in getting that something productive out of the sessions that I have with the students. So I think that is a very popular method that is out there, and it works. So yeah, I agree with that that particular one.
Great, thank you. That's very helpful feedback. Hugh?
Yeah, there's loads of models out there, most of which are quite helpful. They'll follow the same general gist as the GROW model. The GROW is, obviously one of the better ones. I think what's important though is, rather than is use that to start with, get comfortable with it, but as you become comfortable with it, so the relationship will dictate the way the structure should flow, rather than necessarily following a model. And the model is brilliant to use to start until you're comfortable with speaking to the mentee that you're talking with. But ultimately, it's your relationship is what will make the most productive method of engagement at the end.
Absolutely. So it's very much an individual thing, an individual preference. Fantastic. That's all the questions that I noted down. Has anybody else got any other questions or reflections? Otherwise, I'll let you all go back to lunch. Ruth.
One quick reflection from me is that it's hard to separate the professional from the personal sometimes when you're talking about a mentee's needs and growth and ambitions, because I mean, I personally support bringing the whole self to work, and sometimes those things merge. Sometimes you have to work extra hard and it encroaches on personal life, and sometimes personal stuff encroaches on professional life. So I just wondered how other people approach that. I'm quite open, not to go into their personal details and delve into that, because that's not the purpose. It's more of a professional mentor-mentee relationship. But I'm quite open to exploring things that can have an impact on profession, whether that's caring responsibilities or hobbies that people are particularly really into, that are quite a big demand on their time. So I think sometimes it's quite important to understand people's kind of life goals as well as professional goals. That's one of my learning experiences from being a mentor in the past. I'd be very interested to hear other people's experience.
I think I'd just agree. Yeah, I think it's a people package thing, isn't it? It's not you're not just a work bod.
Absolutely. Thank you, Daryl. Okay.
Yeah, I think sharing and being open is really important, because it helps the other person relax and bring down their guards as well. I think there's a fine line with sharing and oversharing as well. I think that's important as well. Then that's built up, because I have a bad habit. I go into oversharing and I think, okay, this is not relevant. So it's just keeping a check on that and making sure that as they're maybe going through or explaining something, you're actively listening, and then maybe trying to relate it to something that you've experienced, and then relaying that story, and that helps them identify that you've been through that struggle and how you overcame it. So just to kind of remember to apply your sharing of personal, professional journeys with them in the relevant context that they may be experiencing. So I think it is tricky. I think, as you're mentoring, you're having those conversations with yourself in your mind. Okay, is this the right thing to say? Because it's almost like therapy is aligned to that, right? So you have to be careful in what you say, but also try to be as open and honest as possible as well. It's a tricky one. It's not easy, but I think hopefully these should be all nice journeys for us. But I think just question and Rose, is there something being trained and not trained, but we are being coached on how we should mentor, and what are the kind of rules and the models and the kind of frameworks? Is there something for the mentees that is happening, or
not
in terms
specifically?
of
They have they have the handbook in the same way, and there's a lot of information in there about how to approach this as a mentee, and a welcome pack that does the same thing. So we've pointed them to, some useful, I hope they're useful kind of resources that help them think through, particularly those early days. What's important to you, how are you going to approach that first conversation, how to potentially take the lead on that, so on and so forth, but not a kind of group like this in quite the same way.
Okay.
We're nearly at time, So it just remains for me to say thank you very much to Rose for coming along, sharing her expertise and some really useful reflections on how to make a mentor-mentee relationship as successful as possible. And thank you to all of you for coming and sharing your reflections and expertise as well. This has been really useful. I've got a couple of actions to take away back to the central team around, as we discussed, that kind of guidance for what I've written down as safety situations. That was a really useful flag. Thank you, Kay. And also, I'm kind of seeing in the chat that there is an appetite for a kind of regular mentors group. So we'll give a bit of space on the website and perhaps a quarterly call in the diary for us to come together as a group and share some of our reflections and challenges and a bit of peer support. So thank you, everybody. Enjoy your lunches and have good afternoons. Lovely to see you all. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
soon.
Bye.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.